All right, welcome to the Jeff Heggie Show. I'm excited today to have Ryan Gottfredson with me. Now, if you've been following my episodes, Ryan has been with me before. He's a best-selling author. We talked about success mindsets before. We've talked a lot about the whole thing around mindsets, and I'm excited for him to introduce his new and upcoming book. It's an incredible book. He's been doing some incredible work and research, and if you follow Ryan, he's been working on this for a long time. And so I'm really excited. Ryan, just give us a little bit more about yourself and let's get into this. I'm excited.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me back. Must have done something right the first go around. So no, this is great. For those who don't know me, I'm a leadership professor at Cal State Fullerton. Those who don't know Cal State Fullerton, we actually have the second largest business school in the United States. So it's a pretty big operation. It's a lot of fun to be a part of. And then I do research and coaching on leadership, and then I consult with organizations. I focus really I feel like my mission is to transform leadership development. And this book is a big part of me trying to live out that purpose. So.
No, this is awesome. So it was actually a mutual friend of ours, Amy Kelly, that introduced us. She knew I was doing a lot of research on mindset and how it applied in business and whatnot. And she's like, I've got someone you've got to meet. And she connected me with Ryan, and his work in mindsets is incredible. And so I really appreciate that. And the opportunity I've got to know you more, Ryan, has been incredible. And it's been so beneficial to myself, but also to my clients with the things that you've been able to teach me. And, as over the last, since we've met, there's been a lot of things I've been watching, through your work and your emails, things that I know you're working on. And there's a few things that as I'm following them, I'm like going over them a number of times. I'm like, I don't know if I'm grasping this, how he's mean to. And now that I've read the book, I'm like, okay, now this makes sense. This is really cool.
Good.
And so I would love to get into the whole concept of the book. Share a little bit about what the book is, why you wrote it, and then we'll kind of get into some of the topics, because it's really some powerful stuff.
But yeah, well, I'm biased. I think it's powerful as well. But here's what I've learned is that leaders are not as effective as we need them to be, right? And leadership development is broken. Studies have found that 75% of organizations do not agree that their leadership development programs are effective. Right? And we are pumping a ton of money at leadership development, a ton of money at leaders, and it's just not, it may be incrementally helpful, but it's not being transformationally helpful. And this book really strives to answer the question, why is that? But then take it even further in terms of how do we improve leadership development? And I could think about this as a leadership developer. I could think about this as just myself. How do I elevate myself? Because here's what I've learned is that there are two different forms of development. There's two different ways that we can improve ourselves. One of those ways is called horizontal development. This is adding new knowledge and skills. And I would argue that this is 95%, if not more, of all of our development efforts focus on horizontal development, adding new knowledge and skills. But that's not the only way to develop ourselves. Another way, and this is a form of development that not very many people are aware of. It's a form of development called vertical development. And vertical development isn't adding new knowledge and skills. It's upgrading our own internal operating system. So here's an analogy that I'm finding that people feel like it's helpful. Is if we could take a glass of, just a regular glass, and we could fill it with stuff, like with water. That's like horizontal development, is we're filling our tank with greater knowledge and skills. And that's surely helpful. What vertical development is enhancing the size of our cup. How much we could take in, right? Because I could gain knowledge and skills, such as, for example, how to balance a budget sheet. Like if I take an accounting class, that's what I'm going to learn. I'm going to I'm going to effectively download the accounting app onto me. But that app, that new knowledge or skills, doesn't improve my ability to navigate change, pressure, uncertainty, and complexity. If we want that, which is what we need from our leaders, we've got to focus on a different form of development, and that's vertical development. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Og Mandino said that the difference between those who have failed and those who have succeeded lies in the difference of their habits. Good habits are the keys to success. Many of the habits that will bring you success in life are easy to do, but they're also easy not to do. I developed the Mindset Journal so that I could easily implement powerful success habits into my daily routine. The power of the Mindset Journal comes from knowing your top priorities and scheduling them into your day. The power of the reticular activating system and its relationship to your goals, your mindset questions, and your daily accountability. So if you want to implement some quick and effective success habits into your daily routine, go to jeffheggie.com/mindset journal and get yours today. So, I guess, as I've listened to you talk about this over the last year or so, it is making more and more sense to me. And, I encourage any of the listeners that are looking at leadership, this book is a game changer for you. And really, when you begin to understand it, the power it'll bring into what you're doing. But what was your path to starting to discover these things? Was it your work in mindset, or was it your work in leadership that got you to the mindset topic?
Yeah, honestly, if I could just go back in time with the knowledge that I have now, the first book that would come would be my new book, The Elevated Leader, and then Success Mindsets would come second. Because mindsets is the how. That's the how you vertically develop. But that doesn't explain the why and the what. And that's what this book does, and understanding vertical development does, is it answers why and then what we need to do. So we need to vertically develop, and then mindsets is the how. So I used to go to organizations and I would say to them, I could help you upgrade your leaders' mindsets. And I would say for about 85% of organizations, they would say, that's nice, see you later. For 15% of organizations, they would say, oh, we love mindsets. Come in and do some work with us. And then I would go do some work. And that was great. But it was still, not a big success rate. When I learned about vertical development for myself, I came across this term and I'm like, what is vertical development? I've never heard of this before. And I start reading about it and I'm like, that is exactly what I'm doing with organizations when I focus on mindsets, is I'm helping people upgrade their internal operating system at their most foundational level, which is their mindsets. I'm getting them to change how they see and make meaning of their world, such that they make meaning of their world in more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated ways. We're getting them to operate at a higher level. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I'm doing with the focus on mindsets. Now I've got a word for it, and which is vertical development. So now when I work with organizations, I talk to them and I say, I can help you vertically develop your leaders. And their immediate response is, oh, what's that? All right. And it's like this inquisitive, like, I've never heard this before. And then it allows me the opportunity to explain. And they're like, yes, that's what we need. Which I think everybody needs. We just not many people don't know how to look for it. And so that's the purpose of this book, is to get people to understand what it is. And I think I would like to think that it would click, like, oh, this is what we need. Let's do it.
Some of the things that I find interesting in the book are you're showing how, for example, the leader that talks about, we need to hire you. My team needs your help, and not recognizing it within themselves. So what is it for leaders and businesses? What are the things that they need to look at to understand what they need help in, where they need to go, those sort of things?
Yeah. So what is really helpful, and I'm going to even just back up, if that's okay, Jeff, is
absolutely.
I think it's helpful to explain where the concepts of vertical development come from. So the term vertical development was coined about 10 years ago. And it started to become more known in the leadership space and management space. But even then, it's not many people know. But the concepts behind vertical development have been around since the 1960s. All of the research around vertical development comes from the field of developmental psychology. And what we've learned is that developmental psychologists have primarily focused on child development. We learned that as children go from infancy to adulthood, they go through different developmental stages, and they do so rather automatically. It's essentially a function of age. But in the 1960s, a few developmental psychologists started to ask the questions, do adults develop, which they assumed that they didn't before? And if so, do they develop through different developmental stages? And what they found is that yes, adults can develop. Yes, there are different developmental stages in adulthood, but that not many adults actually develop in adulthood. And so what they've identified is that there's 3 primary stages that an adult can go through, but it is not a function of age as adults. It now becomes a function of effort. And so what has been helpful for me, and then I think for the leaders in the organization I work with, it's helpful to understand what are these 3 different levels, because then it gets us to ask a question that I think very few people ever ask, which is, what is my vertical altitude? At what level am I at? How cognitively and emotionally sophisticated is my own internal operating system? And so I think by understanding the 3 levels, we could then get a sense of, okay, where am I at? And how is that influencing how I lead and how I impact the people around me? And then naturally, it's how do I elevate? How do I get up to a higher level? How do I upgrade myself? And that's what. So the first half of my book is what is vertical development and what are these 3 mind levels? And then the second half of the book is all how do we elevate once we're there? So that's the power, is we're putting a framework to, so that we could, just as we can measure our height, we're measuring our cognitive and emotional sophistication.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously we want everyone to read the book. I'm not going to give you everything here, but what are those 3 levels?
Yeah. So what's helpful to understand is that at each level, our body, and it's literally our body's nervous system, is programmed to fulfill different needs. So at that base level, and this is the level I call Mind 1.0, and I call them Mind 1.0, Mind 2.0, and Mind 3.0, because they're representative of different operating systems and they're housed in the mind. So Mind 1.0, the needs we are wired to fulfill are safety, comfort, and belonging. People who are, and this is, research has found that 64% of all adults reside at this level. And when we're here, we want to join and identify with tribes that will help us fulfill these needs. So that could be a family group, a peer group, a social group, a religion, a professional association. When we're here at this Mind 1.0, we want to join with groups and tribes that will help us to feel safe, comfortable, and like we belong. And we're also what I would call dependent thinkers, because we kind of say, we step into this group and say, I don't want to lead. I don't want to take charge. You just tell me what to do. This is me being that dependent thinker. You just tell me what to do, and I will do it, provided you keep me safe, comfortable, and feeling like I belong. And again, research has found 64% of all adults operate at that level. Does that make sense to you, or anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, I love that. And for a visual, trying to think of the terminology you use, being on the inside.
Standing in. We want to stand in.
That's what it was. Yep. Yes. Yep. Because I think as we go to level 2, that's a good visualization, using that stand in versus what you do at level 2. So Go ahead and talk about level 2 as well.
So level 2 then is all about standing out. We want to stand out. We want to advance. We want to get ahead. We want to win. We want to be recognized. And this is, in fact, and this is where you see this huge shift in our internal operating system, because we are now programmed to do those things, but we become willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And that's a transformational internal shift of our operating system. And when we're here, we're no longer dependent thinkers. We now become independent thinkers. We stand upon our own feet. We've got our own beliefs. We're willing to push back against our tribe's beliefs. And we are now become driven to accomplish goals or things that will help us to stand out. And what research has found is that 35% of all adults operate at Mind 2.0, and 85% of executives operate here. And I oftentimes call this level, the people who are here, I call them progress makers. They're generally really driven. They're really outcome oriented, but ultimately it's because their body is programmed and wired to stand out. And if they could hit goals, benchmarks, achievements, then they're naturally gonna stand out. They're also in this position where they recognize that there's a whole bunch of Mind 1.0 people willing to give of their power and independence, and they can harness them. And if they could do so effectively, then they could get them to help. They could get these Mind 1.0 people to help them stand out, advance, and get ahead. And this is why we see 85% of executives operate at Mind 2.0, is they're independent thinkers that are harnessing others, generally Mind 1.0 people, to help them stand out, advance, and get ahead.
All right. It totally makes sense when you start looking at it from that way. And you can look within any organization and see that. Now, before we go on to the next level, I'm sure a lot of people think, okay, we've got an executive in this big company, so he must be a Mind 2.0, right? Can you share some examples of maybe someone that we think, yeah, they're a big time executive or something, but they didn't get to that Mind 2.0 level?
Yeah, let me give you a few examples. So I think one, I'm going to give you kind of a big name. I'll give you several big names. Let's do like Jack Welch, I think, is a classic example of a Mind 2.0 leader. He's a progress maker. Now, being at Mind 2.0 doesn't make us bad people. But what it does generally make us is it makes us short-sighted. We do what will make us be successful in the short term, what will help us stand out in the short term. So Jack Welch, what does he do? Well, throughout his career, he had monumental success at GE because he was maximizing shareholder expectations on a quarter-by-quarter basis. And when you're thinking quarter by quarter, you can maximize results for that quarter. But you have a hard time thinking about the long-term ramifications of these decisions that stack up over time. So what happens when Jack Welch leaves the organization? Well, now GE crumbles down because he kind of took out all of the meat and the bones, and it was no longer stable. And you look at, he wrote a book that's called Winning, right? To me, that's prime Mind 2.0 language. You would, as we haven't got to Mind 3.0 yet, but you would never find a Mind 3.0 leader who writes a book called Winning, because it's not about, nothing is about winning to a Mind 3.0 leader. It's all about adding value. So Jack Welch, I think, is a good example. Steve Ballmer, who was CEO of Microsoft for 14 years, I think he's a pretty good example of a classic Mind 2.0 level leader. You look at, Wells Fargo with John Stump and the debacle that happened there. You can look at Travis Kalanick at Uber, the WeWork guy. I forget what his name is, but all of these people, particularly these ones that flame out, it's just these Mind 2.0 internal operating systems that are all about help me to stand out, and they're not thinking about creating value.
Right. Perfect. So let's talk about that next level, the Mind 3.0.
So again, we're got a change in our needs, and our needs at Mind 3.0 become contributing, adding value, and lifting others. And so when we're in Mind 1.0, our bodies are programmed to stand in the short term. In Mind 2.0, we want to stand out in the short term. In Mind 3.0, we don't care about standing in and we don't care about standing out. All we care about is contributing, adding value, and lifting others. So this is a huge designation here, right? Because when we operate below the Mind 3.0 level, our focus, we are wired to focus on ourselves. It's only when we get above that Mind 3.0 level that our body becomes wired to focus on something bigger than ourselves. So when we're here, we're not dependent thinkers and we're not independent thinkers. We are interdependent thinkers. Mind 3.0 people, and you could tell this by the Mind 3.0 leaders, or one of the indicators, these are people who focus on culture. Because culture is never a short-term play. A Mind 2.0 leader will never focus on culture. Culture will never produce a return on investment in the short term. Culture will only produce a return on investment in the long term. And it's essential for long-term success. So this is when we see Satya Nadella come in as CEO at Microsoft and say, the C in CEO stands for curator of culture. We get Alan Mulally, who steps into Ford when Ford is set to lose $12.7 billion that year. And he says, our number one value is to love them up. Right? This is something this isn't about me. It's not about being successful. This is about contributing, adding value, and lifting others. And it's a place that what we find is only 1% of all people get to this Mind 3.0 level and operate primarily from that level. And we find that 8% of executives get to this Mind 3.0 level.
So, I mean, this is powerful. And I don't know if you want to share it here or just mention it that once they have the book, how do people find out where they're at?
So one of the things that comes with the book is a free vertical development assessment. So if anybody wanted to take that, of course, they could get access to the book, or you could just simply go to ryangottfredson.com vertical-development-assessment, and it'll take you there. It's a 15-question assessment that's designed to give you a sense of where you're at in your vertical altitude.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, it's interesting. It was even interesting reading about your experience of realizing where you were on the whole scale. And, of course, everyone wants to say, oh, I'm a Mind 3.0 for sure. But, as we really look at things, it's a powerful tool if we want to become better leaders, to know where you're at and be able to gauge that. So share the next step. We're at that point. Then what?
Yeah. So in order to understand how we go about vertically developing, I think it's really helpful to come back to the base definition of vertical development. So the base definition is elevating our ability to make meaning of our world in more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated ways. So that's a mouthful, but let's just kind of unpack that briefly here. So Jeff, let me ask you, how would you say that most people respond to constructive criticism?
Usually defensively.
Right? We get defensive. And so effectively, we're kind of holding a shield up. Why would we ever hold a shield up?
Protection.
Right? Because we feel we're getting attacked.
Right.
So the people who get defensive, when they receive constructive criticism, they are making meaning of that as an attack. Therefore, I get defensive. And that makes complete sense. That's a complete natural reaction to getting attacked. But then we can ask ourselves the question, is that way that we make meaning of that, is that cognitively and emotionally sophisticated? I don't think so. Right? The most cognitively and emotionally sophisticated people that I know, they say, I like receiving constructive criticism because it's an opportunity to learn and grow. They make meaning of it as an opportunity to learn and grow. And it's just not easy to get there, because if we've got to be in a mental state where we are good with being told that we are bad. And it just takes cognitive and emotional sophistication to get there. So that's the idea, is that just as I mentioned, if we have a group of 100 people, we could stack them up in order of height, right? The shortest on one side, the tallest on the other. We could do that exact same thing with a group with cognitive and emotional sophistication. The problem is it's hard to do that because we don't even know to look for it. But the reality is that the people who are going to navigate life more effectively are the ones who are more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated. I guess let me pause there before I jump into, okay, how do we improve how we make meaning? But does that concept of making meaning and cognitive and emotional sophistication, do you think that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm tracking with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we understand that vertical development is about improving how we make meaning of our world, then if we want to improve, we've got to focus on our meaning makers. And what are our meaning makers? The meaning makers are our mindsets, the mental lenses that we wear that shape how we view the world around us. And so that's where a lot of the content for my first book, Success Mindsets, come in, because then it's like, okay, what mindsets are out there and what mindsets do I have? And how do I develop more positive mindsets? And so that I will say, that's one approach for vertical development, is to focus directly on those mindsets. I think it's the most direct way of vertically developing ourselves.
Right. And I mean, it's another interesting thing, as you go about these things. Even your story in the book of working with a company and they decide they don't want help because they think it's a waste of time once they realize what their mindsets are. As I've worked with people through your analysis of, the figuring out what your mindsets are. I had an experience, you've worked with her as well, when she went through your assessment and said, well, this is wrong. This isn't me. And she sent me a message and I said, well, I've got time this afternoon. We'll talk about it. And by this afternoon, she says, no, I sat down with my husband and yeah, this is exactly correct. So talk more about that too, because I mean, not only knowing where we're at, mind 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, if we're trying to improve, we've got to understand our own mindsets.
Yeah. And here's the thing that's interesting. I have not met a leader who has said, I want to do a bad job as a leader. Right? Every leader wants to do a good job. They get out of bed in the morning. They're wanting to have a positive influence. But despite that being said, 60% of employees state that their direct leader damages their self-esteem. So there's a disconnect that's going on here, right? Is all leaders have good intentions, but not many leaders live up to whatever intentions those are. And the reason why is fundamentally in their mindsets. Because what is going on as they go through their day, they experience stress, pressure, uncertainty, and complexity, is if we are operating at mind 1.0 or mind 2.0, we're getting self-protective. We're doing the things that either help us stand in or help us stand out. And we have a really hard time seeing how our self-protectiveness might negatively impact those around us, or we don't value that as much. And so when I work with executives, so let me give you an example. I'm doing a coaching call with the head of sales for a mid-level organization. And I asked him, what are you doing that's preventing you from being a better leader? And he says, well, I guess I shut down the ideas of my subordinates a lot. And I found this fascinating because I'm thinking, wow, like that's a terrible thing to do. But then the other part of me is like, wow, he actually recognizes it, because there's a lot of leaders who do that and they don't recognize that they do it. So I was glad that he recognized it. And so I said, well, why do you do this? And he said, I don't know. It's just my natural reaction, right? We're starting to get a sense that this is his natural wiring, and something that he's not really conscious of. And so we spent some time diving into why this is. And at the end of our call, he just, oh my goodness, it clicked. And I said, oh, okay, tell me what's clicking for you. And he said, I guess I realized that if my subordinates' ideas come forward and they're accepted by others, then everybody else is going to see them as being smart and me as being dumb for not coming up with the idea in the first place. And so ultimately what we're finding is he's got a fear and an insecurity about looking dumb. And in his efforts to protect himself from looking dumb, he's engaging in poor leadership. And so what I've learned is that the wiring that we develop in our bodies and in our minds to survive our childhood is not the wiring that's going to allow us to thrive as a leader. And we've got to change that wiring at some point in time. And what this leader just came to recognize is, I've got to change my wiring. This is not going to, while it may protect me in the moment, it's never going to get me where I want to go. And so that's where this is just clearly identifying a place where vertical development is needed for this leader.
Right. So now the question comes, that's just who I am. How do I can't change my mindset. So talk about, one, can you change your mindsets? And two, is it through something big or is it through more little things, and how you go about that? Yeah.
So it's going to depend on the person, is what I've learned. So across me working with hundreds of thousands of leaders, what I would say is roughly 1/3 of all leaders, just by awakening to their mindsets, understanding what they are, and given just essentially some resources, I would say 1/3 of leaders are able to run with it, and they take off. It's almost on their own. I would say there's the next third of leaders they're just more resistant. They're just dragging their feet a little bit. They need a little bit more hand holding. They may have a little bit of that attitude of, this is kind of just the way I am. And rather than me adapt to others, and me develop, others need to change to adapt to me. It's kind of their mentality. And what I do see is while they may have some resistance up front, with the right structure, they're able to make significant strides. But I find that there's about 1/3 of all leaders who are they've got this massive wall up, and they have a hard time even sitting with this stuff. So, it's not uncommon for me when I'm doing a coaching call with an executive, and I've got a vertical development exercise that I walk them through. And there's a point in this exercise where it naturally leads to me asking the question, what fear is going on here? And it is not uncommon for me to hear an executive say, I don't have any fears. I'm not driven by fear. And immediately, it leaves me wondering, well, do you not have fears, or are you just not in touch with your fears? Because my belief is everybody's got fears. Not everybody's in touch with their fears. So what I've learned is that there's some people who are really self-protective. And it is really difficult for them to change. And to me, this has led to what I think is the most meaningful aspect of my new book, because then it's led me to ask the question, what makes these people, and really anybody in general, what leads us to be self-protective? And what I've learned is that it is always connected back to some form of past trauma. And to me, trauma isn't an event that occurs to us. It is experiencing a situation where the stress of that situation exceeds our body's capacity to deal with that stress. And when that's the case, then our body's nervous system has to take drastic action to protect us. And when the body does that, it protects us in that moment, but it actually leaves negative, lingering neurological side effects in our body. And then until we treat those and heal those will continue to cause us to be self-protective and not a very effective leader. And so ultimately, I think the most beautiful message of the book to me is, and I'm biased because I've got my own journey, but it's that if we want to elevate as a person and as a leader, we've actually got to heal ourselves. And to me, that's what vertical development is all about, is healing ourselves, our body, our hearts, and our minds.
That's, that was a powerful part of the book for me, realizing that, even something we went through as a child can be impacting our leadership as an adult. It's pretty powerful.
It is. And I think what I've learned for myself is it is not easy to step into that and explore that. But it is essential to do so if we want to be an effective leader. So let me just give you an example. 18 months ago, if you would have asked me if I had trauma in my childhood, I would have said no. Right? My parents were married. They stayed married. They went to every basketball game I ever played. Like they were there. But what I discovered, what I decided to do is I decided to work with a trauma therapist. And I didn't think I had trauma, but I decided to do so because I was learning about different therapy modalities. And there's one therapy modality called EMDR that is supposed to just be one of the most effective at improving our mind and healing our mind. So I said, I just want to try it out. So I gave it a shot. And pretty early on, working with my trauma therapist, we identified that I had a couple of instances of trauma. And what I learned is that while I was never physically abused, I was emotionally neglected. That while my parents were always there for me physically, they were rarely there for me emotionally. So there's a couple of instances, bigger instances as a child, where I think any normal parent would have sat down and hugged and tried to comfort their child. And I just didn't get that from my parents. And so what I learned for myself at a very early age was that if I wanted my emotional needs to be met, it was up to me to meet them. I couldn't rely on anybody else. Well, as I'm awakening to this, I'm learning that, oh, this makes sense. And it gives me a reason why I'm an incredibly independent person. I generally have a hard time connecting with my emotions. And this influences everything that I do. All of my relationships, my past trauma, neglect, has its fingerprints on everything that I do today. And so I've spent the last 18 months trying to heal from that. I'm not where I want to be, but I would also say I feel like I've grown more in the last 18 months than probably the last 15 years combined. And I feel like I would have said that 2 years ago too. So I feel like my growth has really been exponential. It's been a really eye-opening, humbling journey.
That's really cool. So for the leader, from the leader's perspective, now they've started to identify these mindsets where they need to work on these things. What's next? So the first step is just to put a stake in the ground. The first step is always awareness. It's getting a sense of where I am at and where I need to go. And that there's so much power in just doing that. But then in terms of where does the rubber meet the road when we do that? What is really helpful to understand is what we're dealing with when we're talking about vertical development, mindsets, internal operating system. We are talking about our body's nervous system. We're talking about neural connections in our mind. That's what our mindsets ultimately are. And when we understand that, then it's helpful to know that our neural connections are a lot like our muscles. The more we use them, the stronger they become.
And so if we want to develop more positive mindsets, that effectively means that we need to work out and exercise those positive mindsets. As we do that, those will become stronger and our negative mindsets will atrophy. And that's the journey that we're on. And so in terms of how do we do this? Well, I think I'm never going to say it's easy, but I think it's easier than most people think. Because it's not like if I want to work out, if I want to build my biceps, I've got to hit the gym like 3 days a week for like an hour each time, if not more. But if I want to work out my mindsets, it's 3, 4, 5 days a week, but it's not an hour at a time. It's like 5 minutes at a time. That's what research has found, is that 5-minute interventions repeated over time leads to lasting changes in our mindsets. And so part of what I do with the book is just give folks a whole bunch of resources like videos, books, journaling exercises, meditation tools. All of these things are just these little exercises. It's the bicep curl, it's the bench press, these are just little exercises all designed to improve our neural connection. So I think this is where I think most people can make significant movement just by doing those exercises. But I do want to recognize that there are people, and it's a fair amount of people, who have had enough trauma in their life that may not be enough, that they may need some more professional help with a therapist. I mean, statistics say that 80% of all adults have experienced trauma to the degree that it has negatively affected their body's nervous system. So that's most people, right? So,
right.
So I think we can do some things that are building in daily habits, but then some of us might need a little bit more work, and that's okay, I think.
Well, and I mean, I'm so excited for my listeners to be able to get this book and get into it. But I guess the other part I want you to touch on, because I want our listeners to know if this is for them or not. And of course, if you're a leader in a business, an executive or something, absolutely. But to me, it's for everybody. Do you want to talk about who this book is intended for?
Yeah, it is for everybody. I would say I had one primary audience and I had a secondary audience. The primary audience was for the people in organizations who their job is to develop leaders. Because I knew if I could speak to them, because I think they've got 3 different focuses. That's not the right way to say it. Focuses. They're concerned about the leaders in their organization. They know that if they can elevate the leaders in the organization, they can transform the organization. But they're also focused on their team. Usually they have a team of people. They want to elevate their team so that their team operates at a higher level. And I think they want to elevate themselves. They themselves want to operate at a higher level. So that's the primary audience. I think secondarily is just leaders in general. People who want to have a greater positive influence in their spheres of influence. Whenever we look at organizations where there's been a huge positive transformation, what you will always see is a Mind 3.0 leader. Like you look at the turnaround at Microsoft, you look at the turnaround at Ford with Alan Mulally, you look at the turnaround at Disney Animation with Ed Catmull, you look at the turnaround at Pepsi under Indra Nooyi. All of these transformations are because there's a Mind 3.0 leader put in. Right? Here's what I've learned is that the organization can never operate at a level above the current cognitive and emotional sophistication of its leaders. So the only way that we can get an organization to operate at a higher level is to first elevate the leaders. And that's the power of this, is it ultimately leads to transformation in a positive direction.
Absolutely. And one of the questions as I read the book that kept coming to me and I was looking forward to get your answer, and you answered it right away, is where does success mindsets fit into this? And so if you're talking to a leader right now that's listening to this, your suggestion is that they first start with the elevated leader and then read success mindsets?
Yeah, I think that's just the natural progression. I mean, there is some information about mindsets in the elevated leader, but not to the depth that it is in success mindset. So the elevated leader gives us the why and the what, and then the mindsets is one of the major hows of how we do it. But I think if we understand why we focus on mindsets, that then is really powerful. That's what gets leaders and people hooked into it. This is why I'm doing this. It's not just to, change my mindsets. It's to upgrade my internal operating system so I operate at a higher level.
No, that's great. And, from my perspective of reading both books, 100%, they're both highly, highly recommended. Can't say enough about them. So let us know, Ryan, where we find the books, where we connect with you, how we follow your journey, all of those things.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate all of this. The website is probably the best place to connect, ryangottfredson.com. Next best place is LinkedIn, and we would be happy to connect with anybody there.
All righty. And I'll make sure I've got links in the show notes. You do need to make sure to sign up for his newsletter. Some great stuff that comes out with that. But Ryan, thank you. This has been a great conversation. Any leader that wants to up themselves, up their organization, these are a must-have. Like I said, highly recommended. I appreciate you taking the time, and congratulations on the new book.
Oh, thank you. I think what I've learned is that vertical development, I think, is a lifelong journey. And we're all somewhere, we've got our own individual journey, and we could always elevate. And to me, I find that beautiful. I mean, maybe some people find that frustrating, but I think that's awesome. I love that idea. So it really is an honor. Thank you, Jeff, for this platform. And it's just an honor to maybe play a role in some people's lives in terms of their vertical development journey. So it's really an honor to be with you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'll also make sure to put the link to our previous episode talking about the success mindsets in here, so you can go listen to that as well. But thank you, Ryan. Are you an entrepreneur who wants to discover the breakthrough secrets that will produce the results you've been searching for, but you just can't seem to figure out why you keep working harder and harder and you're just not getting those results? I want to tell you about a new challenge that I've created just for you, the Business Domination Challenge. If you want to create the entrepreneurial lifestyle and the business you dream of, then this is exactly what you're looking for. I created the Business Domination Challenge to show you how to grow your business exponentially and to become an optimal performing entrepreneur. What's an optimal performing entrepreneur? It's an entrepreneur who's succeeding in all areas of their life. If I show you how to build a successful business, but your relationships, your health, and everything else is falling apart, that's not a success. It's not about working harder, it's about implementing the correct principles and becoming the person who can do the things that produce the results. Hurry and go to jeffheggie.com/business domination and secure your spot today.